Hello, everybody, and welcome. This panel is all about designing the Hyperloop passenger experience, and I have invited a distinguished assembly of experts to share what it is like to design the transportation experience of the future. My name is Sarah Lukian, and I'm the head of passenger experience at Virgin Hyperloop. I was also recently one of the very first people to ever ride in a Hyperloop vehicle, so I am low-key the world's leading expert in this very niche topic. Fortunately, you will be hearing from folks whose expertise span a much broader and frankly fascinating array of disciplines, from industrial design to architecture to sonic identity. In short, we are a motley crew indeed. Without further ado, gentlemen, let's get right into it. And Joel, let's start with you.
All righty then.
What is the point of this panel, and why should anybody care?
Well, listen, I think, Sarah, you're probably the best person to answer that, but I'll do my one little piece, which is we all, whether or not we realize it, every single moment of our lives is scored by music and sound. And those moments of music and sound are really, they're guiding our experiences, they're triggering emotion, they're helping us understand the framing of a story, linear or non-linear story. You think about a movie score, really, it's the goal about thinking about not just passenger experience, but also about identity in terms of scoring those experiences and scoring Hyperloop as though we were scoring a movie. So why do we care? It's because it's about story, it's about emotion, it's about how do we sort of guide people down a certain path that we want to in terms of having the kinds of experiences we want, like, for instance, around the sound of safety.
I think that's a great response. Storytelling is a really big part of what we're doing here, and evoking the right feelings and emotions along the passenger journey. From my perspective, you said I might be suited to answer it. My view is simply that we have a huge opportunity here to design the future of transportation, and with that opportunity, to paraphrase a greater superhero than I, comes great responsibility. And we have this chance to reimagine what it could be like to travel and make it not only more comfortable, but more inclusive, and a better experience overall.
To your point, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you, but
no, by all means.
But to your point, I think it's really interesting. You think about the history of transportation, those sounds have always been foisted upon us. Combustion engines sound a certain way. Horse-drawn carriages sound a certain way. With Hyperloop, it's really the first opportunity, I think, in transportation to actually create sounds that don't exist in the actual experience, but are there specifically to create better experiences for people. So that's why it was such an exciting project for us, to actually be able to score those things from scratch rather than trying to deal with noise that's already there.
Yeah, it's very cool. We get to actually choose what's in there. It reminds me of skeuomorphism, which is not a term I ever thought I'd say out loud. And I really only know about it because of visual cues, the things that we expect, like rivets on jeans, that cue us to the old way of doing things, and that we think would be weird if they weren't there. Or like the phone icon on your phone looks like a regular dial-up telephone, which is not what most phones look like anymore, at least in the US. The mailbox, things of that nature, but they give us a certain comfort, right? Yeah. They allow us to feel situated in the realm of the understandable and the familiar. And so I think, to your point, that is one of the purposes we hope to have sound play in this overall story.
Yeah, well, that it has semiotics, that sound has semiotics, just like all these physical elements you're talking about.
Right. And I wonder if, I mean, spoiler alert, I know, but I'm curious to ask you, John, if you feel that we had elements like that in the visual design, or Jacob in the architecture, that enable people to feel more comfortable or more familiar with the environment, and why is that important?
Yeah, totally. I mean, what we did here is kind of remarkable. It's, if you think about it in your life as a designer, how many times do you get to design an experience that no one has ever experienced before? It's actually quite rare. So, and then when you think about this particular experience, what we were focused on at Teague was how do you create a sense of trust or comfort? We use the word trust a lot in a pod that's traveling at 1,000 kilometers an hour without windows and in a confined space. In fact, it's a relatively confined space. So that was a real challenge for us, and one that we just loved. And the kinds of things that we did, we put together a design strategy that had 8 key elements to it, and maybe I hit on 2 or 3, because they were all designed to build that sense of trust and comfort. So one was, we talked about welcoming. So if you look at the pod, what we were trying to do there was to create an experience that was maybe more akin to hospitality than transportation. And there was quite a degree of optimism in that pod, I think, in terms of it felt greener, it felt smoother, it felt safer. So kind of a pleasant mass transit experience is what we were trying to create. A couple of other elements of the design strategy, we wanted it to be expansive as well. Despite of the fact that it is a fairly confined space, we use dynamic ambient lighting to open up that space. We used it to simulate the time of the day to create comfort and trust, and also use light to create this subtle sense of movement, because of course you don't see the movement, so you feel it, but we also wanted to simulate it with light. And then maybe the third one I'd focus on in terms of building comfort and trust was this notion of being mindful. And that meant that in all of the digital or information touch points, we wanted them to be really respectful of the passenger and not over demanding. So that was both to create a sense of discovery and delight. So we put together a design strategy with you all, with the team, intended to create a sense of trust in an environment that naturally people are not going to be used to trusting at the outset. So that's how we did it.
Yeah, I think you've hit on some really important challenges that we were facing in terms of the pod design. Jacob, I want to ask you, because John talked about a couple of challenges that we faced for that interior. This effort to design the passenger experience has been going on for over a year, I would say, and perhaps even longer in terms of the architecture of the portals or stations. So from Big's perspective, or from yours, what was your reaction when we approached you with this design brief? And what were you like, oh, this is great, or was it like, this is crazy? I'm just curious about your reaction and whether you saw any challenges right up front.
At Big, we've been collaborating with Virgin Hyperloop 1 and you guys for, I would say, almost 4 to 5 years now, and been part of the whole journey from the beginning of thinking what the future of transportation should look like. And it is, as Joel is saying, this unique opportunity to sort of completely rethink and almost like start from scratch, because we don't want to repeat any of the mistakes that perhaps you find in airplane technologies or in train technologies. Here we are completely free. So if, let's say, in airports, you have a lot of security that you need to deal with, but perhaps with the Hyperloop technology, we are able to get by that and maybe more over in the realm of high-speed transportation, of trains and so forth. So really, our most important task here has been to sort of design the passenger experience all the way from almost from the front door of where each individual, the traveler, is living, and then all the way into the pod. So, and trying to make that as short as possible. We all know that flying is not the journey that it takes from the plane goes down the runway until you land. It's actually most often more time consuming to travel from your front door all the way to until you sit down in the plane with all the check-in and so forth. But I think here we really had the opportunity to think about how do you optimize all these small things, everything from choosing the right gate. In an airport, everybody enters through the main entrance of the airport, and then they distribute from there. But looking at the portal design for the Hyperloop system, we were able to distribute the gates along the facades of to minimize really. So all you need to tell the taxi driver is to drop you off almost at the gate, and then from there all the passenger needs to do is to walk down a staircase and then sit down in the pod that then leaves 3 minutes earlier, as was shown in the animation. The portals themselves, as I was mentioning before, designing the future of transportation, we had the opportunity to sort of minimize the amount of waiting time or the time that you need to get from A to B, both sort of in real seconds, but also the perceived time. So for us, going into the portal itself is also, you know, at a certain point you walk through the entrance, and then there's a time from the entrance and all the way to the pod itself. It might feel like a long time. So as you'll see in the video, there is skylights, which of course means that you'll get the feeling that you are almost still in the foyer of the portal itself. And the next is that you take the escalator down, and then you are at your pod. So our aim was to completely eliminate almost the feeling of being inside sort of a typical airport or train station, but that you are at the gate instantly.
Yeah, and Joel, before you jump in, I think that's really important to hit on, Jacob, because one of the things that struck me about the design is that there's natural light pretty much at all times, whether you go up or you go down. There's a certain transparency of materials and a lot of windows that allow the light to filter in. And then we continued that kind of design phrase with the skylight inside of the pod. Now that's a false skylight. It simulates natural light, but the hope is to reduce the perceived waiting time and to give people a sense of connection to the outside world, which I think is so often missing. Even now, when I sit in a ride share and my head is like buried in my screen, I am no longer as aware of the world around me. And I think that's something that we're missing out on. Joel, I don't want to keep you from your response though, because I think the musical aspect or the sonic aspect of this is really interesting as well.
Well, just to go back to the video, what was so cool about the video was helping us understand we weren't just designing. It's a couple things. First of all, we weren't just designing experience together, which we are, but we're also designing identity together. That the visual components, the physical components of the design, it was clear that this doesn't look like any other form of transportation. It's not going to feel like any other form of transportation. The iconography, just literally every single mode of the experience is unique and is identity, but is also around passenger experience. The thing that really surprised me about the video, I was so excited about it, was exactly, I'm going to pick up what you said before, which is it is about humanity, it's about very much about people, but it also is, look from the video, you understand you're part of a biological ecosystem almost. It really felt very much like harmony came from you and being harmony with nature, with light, with the architectural elements, that I think, quite frankly, exceeded all possible expectations about what this was going to turn out to be. And I think have to give a lot of credit to our colleagues here in the different disciplines. So super exciting.
Yeah, that principle of biophilia, right, derived from the Greek love of life, to me is really important. I mean, you can probably see I'm blocking several plants. I think that connection to nature and other organisms, humans included, that humanity and sense of belonging is incredibly important. John, there are some organic touches in the pod as well. Would you care to speak to those and what inspired them and what the intention was there?
Yeah. So I think we see so often in transportation, and frankly, any form of future, even near future vision, there's a great tendency for designers to go all Tron-like with the interiors, right? Or Star Wars. And we didn't want to do that with this interior. We felt that, remember, we're trying to build trust in a brand new form of mobility that can travel up to 1,000 kilometers an hour in an unusual environment. So we felt that absolutely the wrong thing to do would be to create a Star Wars interior for another vision of the future. So we wanted to have an interior that was welcoming, again, more akin to hospitality than transportation. We wanted to have moments of joy, right? And we spoke about moments of delightful unexpectedness. And we included some of those in the interior. Sometimes that was information displays that disappeared when they weren't needed, but also elements from the exterior. So like we had a moss wall, and we had some much more tactile organic materials. Again, all in this effort to talk about welcoming, delight, unexpected, safe, reassured, and nod towards the efforts we all put into using sustainable materials as well. So all of those touch points that we developed with you all and the design strategy were intended to, again, continue this notion of the passenger being able to trust this environment and be welcomed into it.
I was only going to jump in actually to say I'm so glad that you mentioned the moss wall, John, because you know that that's one of my favorite parts of the pod design, so much so that I, in fact, have a sample of the moss right here on the bookshelf behind me. It has been a great comfort to me at various times during this pandemic because the tactile nature of it is really appealing. The fact that it maintains its verdant nature, despite being displayed at great length, is also really delightful and low maintenance. And for me, that's one of the little surprises that we've included in the overall design. Now, I think all of you have touched on this at various parts of our conversation, but I do want to give you the opportunity to share if there's any part of the design that you or your team thinks is less visible, underappreciated, something that you'd like to highlight for folks who are watching the video and they might not see it. Well, you're nodding, so perhaps you'd like to start us off.
Perhaps the thing that is not visible in the video is the fact that a Hyperloop system is radically going to change the way we live and how we are designing cities of the future. There is what's called the Magetti's constant. It basically is there's a very close relationship with how far away a person lives from their workplace, and that is around a distance of 30 minutes. And so cities have a hard time growing bigger than a 30-minute travel time. With the Hyperloop system traveling at 1,000 kilometers an hour, theoretically, the city growth can be up to maybe 500 kilometers. So that means that you can, if you like living close to the lake and on the countryside and so on, you could theoretically be a part of the greater city of New York, Copenhagen, London, wherever we decide to establish these systems. And then, so I think having that in mind, to actually working on small elements, like making sure that the time you spend in the portal is shaved off to a merely 3 minutes, I think is quite a remarkable thing, that it is really all about optimizing the system of the future of transportation.
One of the, just following on from something that Jacob mentioned, that I believe is just a wonderful thing for us to be able to explore as we move forward. And Jacob talked about radical new technologies like Hyperloop bringing new opportunities to bear, right, on humankind actually. And I think one of the areas that I'm particularly interested in, at Teague we're particularly interested with technologies like Hyperloop, is this notion of inclusivity. And it is one of the founding principles of Hyperloop. But it's evident for us that mobility, and especially new forms of mobility, they're increasingly being seen actually as a human right, right? Because access to affordable, efficient transportation provides access to employment or quality education or quality healthcare. And, you know, those things literally drive social inclusion. So, you know, in this program, we explored different pod configurations, including some high passenger count pod configurations. And I believe as we move forward and as we continue to further develop the Hyperloop, that will be an important avenue to continue to explore. We'll need those higher passenger headcounts in order to achieve the right economics for public transportation. And then when we do that, and the distances we can travel with Hyperloop, I believe it can be really a breakthrough form of new mobility that truly encourages inclusivity. And, you know, none of that is, not many elements of that are evident when we see the video, but that's something that I know we all felt strongly, and is something we look to continue to explore, because that can be an exciting outcome of this new form of mobility.
Absolutely. And you hit on, I think, one of the most important principles that we had in mind as we've been thinking about the passenger experience. I know that for me personally or professionally, a bit of both, you know, my parents are engineers. My background actually before business school was in psychology. And so when Joel was talking, and Jacob as well, about the different ways that sensory inputs can affect your perception of time, like sound or the placement of the gates and the natural light flowing throughout, like that very much resonates for me. And I'm grateful for that background of understanding how much things that we're not conscious of can consciously impact us. So there was a hope to make this kind of an immersive, unconsciously pleasant experience, which I think has been accomplished. And then one of the other core principles is around making it a more inclusive experience. And I think the challenge that I was referring to as I started to speak was that we are at a very engineering focused company. And it's not that my colleagues don't have empathy, they have a ton, but they've never really been invited to infuse it into their work. And so finding ways to identify how other people may use this system, people who are entirely unlike me or unlike us, has been one of the great challenges, but also one of the great thrills of this opportunity. I think there's still a lot more to be explored in this space, but for me, it's what I'm really amped on as we're looking forward. You touched on a couple of things, John, that I kind of want to come back to, but as long as we're talking about inclusion, like I said, one of the main principles for us, we also wanted the experience not only to be inclusive, but immersive and intuitive. I'm curious, if I locked the three of you together in a room and said, make the Hyperloop more of these things, make it more inclusive, more intuitive, and or more immersive, what would you prioritize? And how would you convince the others if they don't agree with you?
What a spicy question.
Yes, Joel was really excited for this one. So Joel,
well, I'm sure everybody is. The thing that I'm so interested about immersive, it's like immersive, forgive me here, but immersive itself can be a garbage word. It's like, what do we mean by immersive? And I think we've begun to have those conversations about what immersive really is. And to us, one of the things we've done a lot of research around this, and we're looking forward to bringing this into the future work we get to do, assuming we're invited. But the idea of the human research components of biometrics, biological, like what can we do to hype people up with sound or music, whether it's binaural beats or other kinds of ways we can use, again, work that we've tested that we know works in terms of getting people amped up to get to their location, which is very different than the calming effect you might want to have as you begin the journey, that we really can, again, in addition to scoring experiences immersively, doing very purposefully with looking at how music and sound affects us and can affect us moment to moment, and essentially score that immersive experience in exactly the way we want to. So I think that biometric component and how we shape people's experience is really one of the exciting things I'd love to talk to Jacob and John about and see how we might be able to work on that kind of thing together, because it is a journey. It's not like the whole thing is entering your time in the pod, your time coming out of the pod, that those are all, and all the moments of the journey in between are really, really important to that true immersive experience.
It's very true what Joel is saying. We just started this journey, and just this looking at portals themselves, there are so many parameters at play here, from the size of the site that we are placing the portal on, to the number of passengers and so forth, that's going to influence, and it's for sure that we will learn a lot going forward when we start using these, or like testing the concepts that we have come up with here together. When we start testing them on a larger number of passengers, maybe there might be a wish for a more sort of collaborative parts with meeting facilities and so on. I think all of these different parameters will influence the way the portals, the stations, and how the sound will be implemented in the future iterations of the designs.
I would, you'd be surprised to hear this, I would be argumentative with the team, and I would say, I would choose inclusive, and I would say, come on, folks, right? So here we have a brand new form of mobility that hasn't ever been invented before. And if we believe access to affordable mobility is a human right, let's embrace that. Let's go for it. Let's define this new Hyperloop as a system that is more accessible. We know that 15% of the world's population has some form of disability or others. There's so much more we could be doing in that domain. If we explore higher passenger head count in the pods, but do it in a respectful manner, unlike we've seen in other forms of transportation. I think that would be something very cool to explore. In this concept, we have wheelchair accessibility, where the person in the wheelchair can wheel themselves in and out of this form of public transportation, which seems like a very low bar, but it doesn't happen in many forms of transportation. Sadly, those folks are required to get assistance from people that work with the transportation company. So I would say let's do a round two. Let's do a round two that focuses on inclusivity, because you know, this thing, the speed this thing travels, the distance it can travel, the population pools that it opens up, the opportunities it opens up is honestly quite remarkable. So I'd love for us all to get together with this level of horsepower that you pulled together, Sarah, which is pretty remarkable, and say, come on, let's just go inclusive and accessible, see what we can develop as 3 or 4 of the best companies in the world at this thing.
Challenge accepted.
Yeah, I love it. John, as surprised as I am to hear you arguing against other views, I actually think you have a lot of buy-in on this team, and I'm actually even more surprised to say I completely agree with your priority here. From my perspective, we have made some design decisions that are intended to make the Hyperloop more inclusive and more accessible, but there is so much more to think about, and it involves aspects of what all of you have spoken about. Like, I'm thinking, okay, I think we can do even better on accessibility for persons of reduced mobility, those who are using walkers or wheelchairs or simply strollers. You know, like a family with kids could be, you know, seen as having some special requirements for their transportation experience. But I'm also thinking, you know, Jacob, how do we make the design and the intuitive flow of a portal easier for people to navigate? What kind of wayfinding can we include, Joel, that is not only visual but also audible, to help people who may be visually impaired or you know, have other sort of invisible requirements that we can't always see and don't always think about? And you know, I got a comment on LinkedIn after this video emerged. Someone was saying, you know, cool design, but like, I don't want to be sitting knee to knee with strangers. You know, part of me wanted to say, well, you don't have to be. It's not even knee to knee. There's a ton of space, but I get the underlying concern, which is that for folks who are introverted or need to concentrate or are not neurotypical, that level of exposure or proximity can be uncomfortable. And so what I would love to do with this team here and with the input of others who are thought leaders in this area is to expand our definition of what accessibility is, what it could be, and really broaden that for the future in a way that hasn't been done ever before, to my knowledge. So I actually think that we're all kind of collectively on board with that goal. Now, to take it away from this very kumbaya moment for a second, John, look, you've made a couple of allusions to where you think the design could go in the future. Look, I just got to ask you, at what point did you think that this design process or this project was going to go off the rails? Was there a moment of frustration? And don't sugarcoat it, because I had one. I'm wondering if you're willing to speak to any.
I will say, first off, this program, and I wouldn't say that if it wasn't the truth, was an absolute pleasure for the team to work on. It was fantastic collaboration from Virgin Hyperloop, and you modeled the way, Sarah. It was really tremendous. The whole team absolutely loved it. There were a couple of, I can think of one time in particular where the program was at risk. fairly dramatic way of saying it, but where the design concept was at risk, I would say. And that was, this was a reveal, right? This cabin interior was a reveal, a first of a new thing. So it needed a certain amount of newness about it, and a certain amount of future focus to it. Yet at the same time, as a design team, we felt it was important for Virgin Hyperloop to show this is real, this is coming. This isn't just a futuristic vision that's 20 years out, it's real. So navigating that tension between having an exciting futuristic reveal with an interior that was very maybe flashy and drawing attention to itself, and positioning it as, on the other end, as a real solution for the near-term future was a tension in the program. And we had one incident, you know, and that ultimately went to the executive team at Virgin. If not, I think some board members were also on that call, and they made a fantastic decision in the end. But there was a moment there where, as a design team, we thought, "Whoa, we might lose this now. We might not lose the project, but lose what we felt was important and what I believe you felt was important as well." So there was that one moment, which was, you know, one of those meetings where you're kind of gear up for it and you don't exactly know how the outcome's going to be, but it went very well. And we approached it with a design strategy and rational argument to position the concept that was ultimately selected as why it was right. And it went very well, that meeting in the end. Is that the one you were thinking about?
Yeah, I was thinking about that, John, and I'll be even more explicit with the way that I saw it. Basically, we had a vision of this as needing to be accessible as a near-term future transportation experience, not something that is super futuristic and aspirational. It had to be aspirational and attainable, right? And that was a constant tension in the design, as I think it has always been and will continue to be until we deploy you know, in a production capacity. And one of the aspects of that, really, John and I had a lot of conversation about having higher capacity pods. The design that is displayed in this video has a capacity of about 18 people, which is within the range that we anticipate pods having. But we were thinking, what if we could re-envision like a subway design, you know, even more streamlined and pared down and higher capacity. And I think there's still opportunity there. But we did get the feedback that based on different regional preferences and you know, the needs of different stakeholders and what the public could get excited about, maybe we wanted to show something that was a little bit more in between a kind of like a luxurious standard and the very mass transit version of it. And I think we came up with a great solution, but for sure we felt some tension and frustration there as our original design was invited to change. I wanted to offer you all a quick fire round. If anyone wanted to shoot at me something that they are frustrated with or don't like about current transportation, I can try and concisely respond to it with Hyperloop's solution. As you can already tell, succinctness, not my strength. So this may not be the best way to end, but I'm here for it. How about you, Jacob? Is there anything that you don't like about transportation today or you think could use improvement?
It is so easy to fall back on the typical means of transportation and sort of borrow elements from trains, limousines, airplanes, and so on, and dump it all into this one. And I think sort of we just, every time we get the opportunity, we need to remind ourselves, both the engineers, but also the three of us helping you to design it, that we have this opportunity to really rethink and reimagine the way that we travel in the future. And I think that was also kind of the challenge when looking at the portals, that we were constantly falling into this sort of, but at a train station you do this when you need to check in, and what about security and so forth. And I think we really have the opportunity that we need to remind ourselves on all levels, also going forward, that we are in a very unique position here, and very soon we are gonna make some very critical decisions about the design that we almost can't take back.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. Jacob is too diplomatic to say anything that he hates about current transportation, but he sees the opportunity to change it for the better. What about you, Joel? You have a sly smile.
Oh my, don't get me started on transportation. To me, the most frustrating things are you're going to some place you've never been before, trying to figure out where they're going. You're juggling baggage and tickets and phones, and there's dins of noise and just so much confusion. So I think to me, that's one of the most frustrating parts, which I know there are a lot of elements that all these teams have been focusing on to try to streamline those things, which you don't even know why, but you'll love this. Like I think that's one of the principles that we think about. It's almost like the design exercise we think about as sound people is, where can we take the sound out? It's not more sound, it's much less sound, because just as John and Jacob do, we think about white space in design. For us, white space in design is silence, or perception of silence. So I think those just getting rid of the general chaos and din of noise and confusion in many forms of transport, to me, that's the part that drives me absolutely crazy. I'm overstimulated very easily.
I think we have revealed a design that helps to mitigate that in a great respect. I mean, the architectural design has these wide open spaces and natural light. The whole experience is meant to be streamlined, and you can buy your ticket on the spot. You can do it in advance. You can move through security seamlessly, get on the pod, feel like you're still kind of outside, like Jacob mentioned earlier, and then be immersed in this environment that the Teague team with man-made music has made so much more calming and soothing. That was one of my hopes. You know, I live in Los Angeles, and commuting is such a huge part of most days, at least pre-pandemic. And what if we could make this experience not only a source of, not only not a source of stress, but actually something that is actively calming, a respite from your day. I think we're getting there. What about you, John? Anything that you hate about transportation or you'd like to see changed?
Yes.
Where to begin? Do we have another hour?
I have a very personal one, so but I'm going to ask you to how Hyperloop's going to solve it. So, in spite of the fact that I have over 1 million miles on Delta, Air France, KLM, I actually have a fear of flying. So how is Hyperloop going to help me, Star? That's what I would like to know.
How are we going to help you
overcome I have a fear of flying. How's Hyperloop going to help?
Great solution. Hyperloop is not flying, but it goes just as fast and you spend less time waiting around in the station. So problem solved. No, but I actually think that that's a really important point, John. I'm a former management consultant. I traveled for work every week, and I am also a nervous flyer. And I had to overcome it because I had to travel, as I'm sure you have. But I think there are a couple of things to note around that that Hyperloop can help with. First of all is just the design that we've all worked on together. Right, we've used the word welcoming a number of times, inclusive, appealing, optimistic, because I recognize that this is a new form of technology, right? And people are putting their trust in us if they come and ride it. And so it's incumbent on all of us to invite people into the experience in as welcoming a way as possible. I really think that transportation on most modes has actually gotten less welcoming and less comfortable for all of the technological innovations. I have yet to see the passenger experience take the same step, like progress that we're looking for, and that should be enabled by the tech. But to some of the other things that make people nervous flyers, and I know I meant to respond to this very briefly, but I can't help but speak at greater length. You know, for me, I think it's the turbulence, it's the drop in the stomach when you're taking off, it's the knowledge that I'm 35,000 feet in the air. I work with a number of engineers. My parents were engineers. I have some basic understanding of the tech that is enabling this flight, and yet I still feel discomfited. And I think some of it is the perceptual stuff that we're not aware of. It's the vibrations, it's the turbulence that we're not always conscious of, that our body is saying, what's going on? This isn't my comfort zone. Whereas the Hyperloop actually doesn't have any of that lateral turbulence. John, you've mentioned Teague's work in design. I mean, the company's been around for about 100 years. I know you've been there for most of that time. What do you see as being kind of the next big trend or innovation in transportation? You guys have been designing Boeing's cabins since the 40s. Where do you think that's headed?
Yeah, I'd just like to say that was very offensive, sorry.
Gotta get one in right at the end.
I don't know if it's a trend, but climate change is going to have a profound impact on transportation. But I mean, if you think even this month, January, GM announced $27 billion of investment over the next 5 years in electric vehicles. California, what I think the 4th or 5th largest economy in the world, said they won't sell gasoline-powered cars in 15 years. Boeing announced by 2030 their entire fleet will be able to take sustainable aviation fuel. So, you know, not necessarily a trend per se, but I think transportation is going to be reshaped over the next 20 years. And, you know, I mean, we're fortunate that we're already working in many domains: automotive, aviation, rail, even urban air mobility, Hyperloop, because I think companies understand that design is going to play a critical part in reshaping that industry as a result of climate change. So I think that is going to be profound over the next 20 years.
Great, climate change. That's a good one. Thanks, John. What about you, Jacob? You know, either a trend looking forward, or I know that you lead Big Ideas, which uses data to make innovative design decisions. How should we be using data to create and innovate for the future?
Yeah, but I'm very much in line what John said about sustainability being probably a bigger and bigger driver for everything that we design. We see, because we are almost like looking 10 years ahead, because some of our buildings will take many years to be built, we see that there is a bigger and bigger interest for clients to build sustainable, and also within our office, we are becoming more and more, our toolbox is becoming more and more sophisticated, so we can actually simulate everything from small wind particles that pass around our buildings, so that we use our buildings in a much more clever way to avoid getting heat in by building better windows and so forth. So the whole envelope of the buildings are essentially becoming more and more clever and can sort of reject the heat and the environmental impact on our buildings. So that it's not only when we construct the buildings that we have sustainability in our mind, using local materials and materials that have a low impact on our environment, but it's also running of the building. Where do we get the power from, and so forth, which is a big driver for the design of a Hyperloop system. Where's the power coming from when you deal with transportation, which is something that the airplane are having a hard time, or at least they need to find new ways of getting a sort of biofuel into their machines. But when we're down on the ground, we have available resources in solar and wind and hydro right at our doorsteps.
Yeah, a great point about the differences between existing and new forms of transportation and overall trend sustainability. How about you, Joel? What, I'm curious because I know that your team at Man-Made Music has, worked not only on sonic identity and branding, but actually used music and sound in kind of unexpected industries or arenas, like healthcare, for example. What is there one industry or direction that you think we're headed that's in dire need of better sonic design?
Yeah. Well, you just threw a softball, so that's great. I mean, I think one of the places we're really most concerned and putting a lot of energy and effort trying to get smarter and smarter in is in the area of healthcare and hospitals in particular. In emergency rooms and hospitals throughout the globe, there are there's it's a phenomenon really called well, it's called a lot of different things, but I would talk about it as alarm fatigue. That there are multiple devices, sometimes between 6 and 10 medical devices in emergency rooms that are not designed to talk to each other. They're not designed in an organic way to help caregivers or to bring calm to patients. They're really individual devices that are designed sonically to make sure they don't get sued, the device manufacturers, so that each one of them has to scream louder than the next, because the companies don't want to get sued. So the question is, how can we utilize sound to actually provide a much more coherent, cohesive experience in terms of, sorry?
Harmonious experience.
Harmonious, but also it is a data-driven, healthcare is very data-driven. How do we bring to healthcare professionals the ability to synthesize different data streams so that they can tell the healthcare state of a patient? Just one quick example, we've been talking a lot about really almost creating like a symphony of healthcare. So if there were different areas of a frequency spectrum, almost like you've got your woodwinds and you've got your bassoons operating in different frequencies, maybe certain areas of the frequency spectrum might be about heart rate. Some of them might tell a doctor about blood oxygenation levels. Different areas of really critical care inputs and things that people need to understand, and also simultaneously at the same time really be able to calm patients, in some ways maybe even allow them to choose their own journey in terms of the sonically, what does their room sound like? People just, again, having control, or that sense of control we were talking about in transportation. It's the same thing in healthcare. Just one other quick example right now, one of the, so this is again looking at analogies, there is now a push toward pain medication being triggered by a patient. Rather than being prescribed by a doctor, the patient gets to push a button, and you only get to a certain amount before you're going to be cut off. But the reality is that the studies show that if you are in control of your experience of pain medication, you actually use a lot less pain medication. So it's looking at those ways to synthesize different types of sonic input to make it useful and calming, and giving people an opportunity to choose their own journey or really choose their own experience in hospital rooms.
This is fascinating. I've totally fallen short in my hope to keep everyone, including myself, succinct, because this has been such an interesting discussion. Thank you for sharing that, Joel, and all of you for sharing what you think is next. I want to thank our audience for joining us, and all of these distinguished, wonderful panelists changing the future in innovation, design, mobility, architecture, healthcare, music, and transportation. So thanks again, everyone. And hopefully see you all soon to keep dreaming up how to make the future more inclusive and innovative and effective for passengers.